So a bit of a backstory before I get into why you are watching this video, which is how I went from 0 to 60K salary as a digital marketer. And the backstory is really simple. This is probably over 15 years ago or so. And I had been, very, not in a great place. Some people will call it broke, but I just choose to say no, I wasn't in a great place. But I stumbled on digital marketing because I was reading Marketing Management by Philip Kotler. If you haven't checked out any of those publications, I think that you're doing yourself a great disservice because those in those publications are very, very critical fundamentals to this thing we call digital marketing or just marketing. Period. So I stumbled upon those publications and I'd been reading and studying them I wasn't doing marketing or whatever at the time. I just took interest in them and I would study edition after edition. And I noticed as I was reading each of the editions that there was this thing that they were introducing called digital marketing in his books. At one point in one of the editions, it was cited as, like an upcoming trend, and the next edition, it was cited like it was, this thing that is now gradually becoming a part of a part of marketing, broadly speaking. And then, eventually became mainstream. So at the time, when I saw it in the book, I then went online. We had cyber cafes then. I think in some markets they call them internet cafes, or just cafes, So I would go to those cafes to try to, study a bit more online because broadband internet wasn't as, as it is today, it wasn't like that back then. So I just kept studying about this thing called digital marketing. And eventually, I think it was about a year or so or 2 years in, I then got an opportunity to work at this new agency. I dare say that was the first digital marketing agency, if not, I dare say it was the first digital marketing agency in Nigeria at the time. So got invited to, work there. And, it was a really interesting experience. It was a really interesting experience just starting and being one of the first to really do this thing called digital marketing. So that's the backstory. That's how I got into digital marketing. And I got my first job then. And, from there is where I'm going to start telling you some of the things I think drove my growth to 60K salary, I think fairly quickly, judging by the times we were in back then and, what the sort of the growth opportunity that I had. So let's get into it. The first thing I think is responsible for my growth and how I went from 0 to 60K fairly quickly is my analytical skills. Now, when I say analytical skills, besides the fact that that kind of skill set is a great fit with digital marketing, at least with the job description I had at the time, which was senior executive search engine marketing. This amazing person had moved back from the UK to start this agency, and she was looking for people who would join the company. So I joined as senior executive search engine marketing, and my analytical skill sets, I think, were a great fit for the job description at the time. That said, I think that having an analytical mindset or skill set is very, very critical to your growth in marketing and in digital marketing for sure. Because, and then when I say analytical, it's nothing too crazy. I just mean like, as long as you can think logically, like if this, then that. If you have that kind of skill set or that kind of approach to thought processes and things like that, I think that it's a great fit with digital marketing, and that's something I think worked for me at the time. It helped me hit the ground running when I started the job, and very quickly, I mean, the results started to speak for themselves. So number one was my analytical skill set, and I think it's something anyone can develop. Number two is strategic thinking. Now, while analytical skill sets applied fundamentally to the job I was doing at the time, specifically for me, I knew in the space of a few months that I needed to elevate my thinking to more strategic thinking from a client perspective and from the business perspective. On the client side, is that the clients, yes, they want this thing you're doing called search engine marketing or digital marketing, but it's that it has to, you have to find a way to blend that with everything else they are doing, which is where, the strategic thinking comes into play. And I talk about this a whole lot in one of my other videos in terms of thinking in frameworks and things like that. So I'll leave a link to that other video where I talked about thinking strategically. I'll leave a link to that in the description. You can check that out. So that's on the client side, thinking at a strategic level in terms of what you were doing as a digital marketer and how that merges with every other, marketing channel that they are, taking advantage of. The other thing on the business side is that for the digital agency I was working with at the time, very quickly I realized that Eyitayo, you can't just be picking up paychecks. You have to figure out how the business is doing. Are we growing? What are the opportunities? What do we need to do that we're not doing? How can we be better? And it's just thinking about that from a strategic level on the business side. I think was one of the things that also impressed my employer at the time, who I think fairly quickly saw these things in me and gave me the opportunity to grow, which I think is a big part of this whole journey as well. Is that I had, a boss who gave me the room to really express my skill sets, who gave me the room to grow. I think that played a very critical role in this whole story. So strategic thinking on the business side in terms of the digital agency I was working with at the time, and then on the client side in terms of beyond search engine marketing, beyond digital marketing, how does it tie? How does everything tie together to deliver real business results for the client? So that's number two. So the first one is analytical thinking. Number two is strategic thinking. Number three, I think, obviously, whether analytical or strategic, as long as there is no business performance, then, I think all of that it doesn't quite, I mean, it can't exist on its own. Is that those two things must ultimately drive performance, which is your personal performance on the job and for the business as well. So, on the job fairly quickly. It was clear that I had a very high level of performance in terms of getting the job done, in terms of seeking new opportunities to do more, and so on and so forth. Like on a personal performance level, that was something that very early on was very clear in the things that I was doing. And then on the business side is that, the things I was doing within my own sort of, JD job description was driving very clear business results. I remember that one of the clients I was at that I had to manage, which was a great client, by the way, because I had the opportunity to fly out of the country, to Dubai at different times for meetings with this client, because this client was based in Dubai. It was a real estate investment firm. Anyway, that's the story for another day. But the beauty was that, what we were doing with digital was driving real business results, which meant that this real estate investment client was selling out on their portfolio. And as long as you are doing that for the business, it's very that your business, the agency, would make money is it's a given. Do you get what I mean? So from analytical to strategic, um, both of those things is to drive your personal and business performance. And as long as you are doing that, growth is inevitable. So that was number three. Number four is then starting to frame my thoughts about the subject matter, in this case digital marketing. And I spoke about this in that same video I talked about earlier. I'll leave a link to it in the description. You can check that out. But it's that I then got to a point where it became very clear. I had my thought processes, I had my ideas, I had my I started to develop my own approach to the things I was doing at the time, and I started to frame them in methodologies or frameworks and things like that. And that immediately started to show thought leadership within the business. And as you're showing thought leadership within the business and the agency at the time, it was easy for management or leadership to see that this person really has what it takes to continue to move to higher leadership roles, which meant better pay, better benefits, and things like that. So I think that this is also very important, that as you grow in your career, you start to explore this conversation about thought leadership by framing your thoughts, by sharing your ideas, by sharing your mindset when it comes to your subject matter, whether it's digital marketing or finance or human resources, whatever it is. I think this is very, very important. And I believe firmly that it contributed a great deal to really accelerating my growth to that 60K salary we've been talking about. And then finally is building relationships. I think that this one goes without saying. At least that's what I thought until in recent times. Is that you have to understand that relationships are very pivotal to the growth of your career, and whether a relationship with your boss or your colleagues or stakeholders or partner agencies or vendors or whatever, is that you have to be deliberate, you have to be intentional about cultivating and building these relationships over time. And you'll be very shocked at how these things start to play out at the points where you didn't even expect them to play out. I think it's very, very important. And I think the subtext to this building relationships is that just be a good human being, just be a great person, treat people nice, talk to people well, not because you have any motive, but that's just what you should do, as a person. Just be a good human being, just be kind to people, treat people well. And I promise you that when you start to withdraw from that bank of goodwill, you will be glad that you did. Speaking about bank of goodwill, on my podcast and on a separate channel, the Diary of a CMO, I'll put the link in the description. I was talking to one of the marketing leaders in my market, and this idea of building goodwill, of building relationships. He spoke about it extensively, and I'll leave a link to that as well in the description, so you can watch that for your benefit. So for me, these are the 5 things. If you ask me, how did I go from 0 to 60K salary? In a relatively short period of time. This is how it happened for me. My analytical skill sets, I think, were a great fit to my job description within digital marketing at the time. And when I say analytical skill sets, I mean, simply put, as long as your mind can work in this logic of if this then that, that's really at the base level, right? As long as you can approach things like that, I think you'd be fine. That's analytical skills. Number 2, strategic thinking, is that beyond what you were doing within your job description, how does it tie to the performance how does it tie to delivering real business results for the clients? And how does it tie to delivering real business results for your employer? I think that by being mindful of those 2 things, it also really helps me to accelerate my growth. Number 3 is performance, is that you have to be sure that everything you're doing is driving performance for the client and is driving performance for your employer as well. Number 4 is thought leadership, is that at some point you now have to start to frame your thoughts in frameworks or methodologies. And you can check out the video in the description out where I spoke a bit more about frameworks and things like that. But it's very, very important as you start to show thought leadership with what you are doing, whether for your employer or your clients, it becomes very clear that you are leadership material, and your growth becomes inevitable. And finally, is building relationships. And I said earlier, the subtext to that is just being a great human being. Treat people well, be kind. In the world of today, it's easy for you to be fixated on what you're dealing with or what you're going through. But regardless of all of these things, just be a great human being, be kind to people, treat people well, talk to people nice, and you'll be shocked how that would play out at some point in your career and in your growth. So that's it, guys. That's my story on how on what I consider are the ingredients that took me from 0 to 60K. If you have any questions regarding how you could grow your career as well, please feel free to leave it in the comments. I try as much as possible to answer questions that I find there. And that's all I have for you in this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.